What is the biggest challenge facing people on this issue?
Cognitive dissonance.
You're listening to The Brendon Marotta Show.
On this episode, I talked to John Adkison, a father, activist, and genital autonomy advocate. I spoke with John because I wanted to understand the journey that someone goes on, from merely learning about the issue of circumcision to becoming an activist against it. If you've gone on this journey yourself, elements of John's story may feel familiar to you, but I think it highlights the challenges that activists face. We also talk about the challenges that men face and the challenges of being a parent and an activist at the same time. Now, here's John. How is it that you became interested in this issue?
Well, I was 35 when my first son was born, and I never took the time to think about the issue. I didn't even know there was a movement, honestly. Uh, I assumed that because it's happening so frequently, I had no idea what the numbers were across the world or anything like that. I just thought that most boys, if not all boys, were done this way. That this was just, kind of like going along with vaccines. Like pretty much everyone gets them done because it does something great medically or whatever. And my wife's OB didn't offer any information, so luckily someone gave us information, and that changed our minds. And over time, I realized that this is a big problem. They're not offering people information, so they're kind of going off of social norms or whatever, and it's harmful. And the more I've studied it, the more I've realized how harmful it is for myself too.
So I'm curious, what information is it that you first saw that made you rethink it?
It was an article, I believe, in Mothering Magazine. At least that's the most memorable information I saw. And the main thing I focused on was the list of reasons that it's promoted on medical side of things. I didn't consider the religious side of it at all. I've been called a follower of the way, but I'm not Christian. I'm definitely not Muslim or Jewish, or wouldn't even necessarily fit myself into any other category of other religions in the world. So I strongly believe in religious freedom, and I think that doing certain things with your children around religion is, I don't want to necessarily indoctrinate them too much. I want to give them the information, let them make their own minds up. I want them to be their own individual selves. So definitely was not a reason for doing it. So the only reasons were potentially medical. And when I started seeing that all the medical reasons for it, medical benefits, as some people put it, is all preemptive, right? You're cutting off something to reduce chances that it might become infected, or or the larger part, the entire penis somehow becomes infected because it's there. If we take that logic to any other body part, we can justify preemptively cutting off toes of children. And people are like, well, that's totally different. Well, so what you're saying is that you value toes, but you don't see any value to the prepuce of the male.
So, one of the things I'm interested in is how it is people go not just from discovering an issue, but taking activism on it. And that's obviously something that you've done. And I suspect that most people listening to the two of us talk have either seen your work or they've seen my film and have some familiarity with this issue and why it's important. But I'm also curious what the journey is from learning about an issue to actually deciding to do something about it. So for you, I think a lot of people either see my film or they learn something about this issue, but they don't really take any kind of action. It's sort of a something that affects maybe the choice that they make for their children, but not necessarily something that they feel the need to go into the world and do something about. So I'm curious for you, what was that change or moment that made you decide to start taking action on this?
It took me about a dozen years to finally decide to speak. I'm a little bit ashamed by that, but at the same time, I realized that I had to go through my own process in my own head to get there. And it was almost 12 years into my son first being born, where I met you and got to see the documentary at the Social Justice Film Festival, and that was kind of a turning point for me. it was shortly after that I realized in my own, it's like, okay, one of these days, the babies that are being born today, they're 15, 16, 17, 18 years from today, they might complain, and they might meet me, and they're going to say, well, you knew it was bad, so what were you doing about it to try to protect me as a child? And I want to be able to have a decent answer to that.
So for you, it was the wanting the next generation to feel like you'd stood up for them or done something for them.
Correct.
And then once you knew that that was something you wanted to do, how did you decide what action you were going to take on that?
It's just one thing after another after another. I have this habit of noticing gaps, areas where, things, holes that need to be filled. And if I can figure out a way to fill it, then I will.
Phrasing.
What's that?
Sorry, I couldn't. My own juvenile mind couldn't help but add phrasing there. Just holes that need to be filled. We're having a conversation about a serious subject, but at the same time, it does relate to genitals. So
it does, and yeah, we can make plenty of jokes about genitals. I had a thought earlier today. It's like, we need to turn the tables a little bit, because people make jokes about this topic all the time. Turtlenecks and anteaters and stuff like that. It's like, let's turn the jokes on the people that make jokes.
well, those jokes aren't really that funny, and they're certain. Part of humor is truth, and so in order for the joke to work, there has to be an element of truth to it. And it seems that most of those jokes really have an element of discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
There's like something that they're uncomfortable, and they're trying to lighten the discomfort through humor. But there's not actually any insight in the joke or anything that's being said with it. It's just like, I'm uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. I imagine that's true. And I also imagine it differs for each person depending on where they are on the topic and how much they understand about the topic.
So you were looking for spaces where there was action that needed to be taken, but no one had done it yet. What were those things that you found, and how did you find them?
So one of the things that led me to creating the Genital Autonomy Society website is that there are several small organizations in this movement. Yeah, Bloodstained Men, Your Whole Baby, Intaction, Intact America.
Some of those aren't small, I would add. Some of those are fairly large, but you're right.
Yeah.
There are a lot of small organizations.
Yeah, depending on what you call small versus large, but
sure.
It was very frustrating to me. It's like, why can't we all just work together underneath one symbol, right? And if instead of having all, we got the heart from Your Whole Baby, we have the Bloodstained Pants logo from Bloodstained Men, and we have all these other logos that people have put together and all. Why can't we just get together and have one and make us look bigger? Because I think that, I want people to see, like, this, the International Child for Genital Autonomy, and just know right away what that is about. For a lot of people, you might see like the colored ribbon, and okay, well, that's for dealing with cancer or whatever. There's also a colored ribbon for genital autonomy, but people will look at that and they don't necessarily distinguish that from cancer. So I figured, well, these organizations won't work together because of lots of reasons, right? They have different ideas about how the best approach, and who has the best information, who doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. And other issues sometimes get mixed in with this issue. Unfortunately, it is what it is. So I wanted to be able to figure out a way to make the movement look large. So one of the things I did was I created a map. I put a map up on the website, and I put pins all over the map, all across the globe. And those pins link you to organizations in various places.
So I'm curious though, why, when you were starting, was your choice to focus on creating more connections between organizations rather than join a particular organization and then just follow or work with them? What made you did gravitate towards that direction?
Yeah, I didn't start off with that idea. I started off joining Your Whole Baby, and Bloodstained Men, in any way I could. Any opportunity that I had to speak out, educate people, I jump on to it started off with Facebook, and then the various Facebook groups where the aim was to educate people, and it branched off from there.
So you reached out to Your Whole Baby and Bloodstained Men. You said, anything I can do to help, I want to help. And then what sort of stuff did they have you do? What sort of things did they send your way?
So Your Whole Baby sets up, well, of course, they have stuff online, obviously, where you can be involved in their community group, and you can talk to people in comments, whatever, when people are asking for questions about why they should keep their child intact and stuff like that, and you can respond. They have a mantra that says you have to be, gentle about it and all, but they also have opportunities where you can participate in their tabling group, where you can organize at fairs, at pride events, at baby expos, and I've done pretty much all of those at one point or another, and set up a table, and you purchase a banner or two. Quite often you'll do fundraising along with Your Whole Baby to help pay for those things, get the all the cards and pamphlets and whatever to hand out. And I went even further than that. I purchased other things that related, that I could share and hand out with people.
So the activities they had you doing were, you were talking to people online, you were running booths at baby events, you were handing out cards to people. And then how did you go from that to wanting to create a website of your own and do something like that?
So I was on a chat and like a group meeting with some other advocates, and one of the things we realized right away is, like, we need a way to keep a way for people to kind of register themselves as advocates and identify what their talents are, their strengths, et cetera, the things that the ways that they want to participate. So I'm an IT guy, corporate IT guy, so databases aren't that complex to me. Putting together a website isn't all that complex to me. And so I just was like, okay, I'll put this together. No one else is offering to do it. So I just jumped in and created it.
I think it's great that there are so many people involved on this who have an entrepreneurial mindset where, like, if there's something that needs to be done, we'll figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And it sounds like too, you were mentioning earlier wanting to create greater coordination between groups. What was the impulse for that? Was there just, it sounds like, because I've noticed this too, there's just sort of a desire for that that's ongoing in the movement. And it's been a need that's been there for a while, but I don't know that people have quite figured out how to solve it yet. But now that I think about it, I'm also more curious about why that need is there, what the desire behind it is.
Well, you know how certain animals operate in the wild, right? They like a peacock. They spread their wings wide and they end up looking really big, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or certain other animals will just do whatever to spread out to make themselves look bigger than they actually are. So I want people to see this as not a small fringe movement.
Right. That's an interesting analogy, though, the desire to make it look big, because it seems to me that when I talk to people, it actually is very big.
Mhm.
It's just that not everyone is aware of the label intactivist or identifies with that. And at the same time, not everyone is public about their advocacy. But that seems to be the case on most issues. Most people care about a large range of issues. If you talk to people, for example, about environmental issues, there's a lot of people who care about that, but there's very few people who identify as an environmentalist and are going to protests around that on a regular basis. So I don't know how much of that is a function of this particular movement and how much is a function of activism in general.
Yeah, I prefer to use the term advocate, genital autonomy advocate, because activism might have a negative connotation to it.
Sure.
Some people think, when they think of activists, they think of people blocking the freeway.
Isn't it interesting, though, that there's an idea of what an activist is, and people who are doing social change work will call it something other than activism because of
Mhm.
that brand.
Yeah, yeah. So advocacy seems to work better for me.
I'm totally aware that there's a stereotype around activist, and at the same time, I kind of don't care. Like it's a word for a thing.
Yeah, yeah. You say that we're large, but here's the thing: when I've looked at anti-FGM petitions, and they get large numbers in the six figures pretty quickly in a short period of time. But when we try to put out petitions that include ending male genital cutting practices, they get very, very small numbers, unfortunately, at this
Sure.
time.
Yeah, there's multiple reasons I can think of for that. There's the social stigma of talking about the issue.
Mhm.
There's just the distribution. I've seen people make a petition for a very good cause that gets no signatures just because they don't have a big audience and it's
Yeah,
hard to distribute.
yeah.
So I totally see that. So you're
We
wanting, go ahead.
we do have some popular people in the movement like Alan Cumming, and he works with Intact America a lot, and Penn and Teller, and the guy that Tosh 2.0 and Adam Owens everything. So this movement has been seen by large numbers of people. Just I guess I haven't decided to join it on at that level yet.
It seems to me that having this conversation, one of the interesting things I'm noticing is what's known as on ramps in a movement. So, on ramps are basically how you get involved in something and discover it.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I notice is in your story, there was an on ramp for you around particular organizations you could contact. And then the work that they had for you was staffing a booth and talking to people online. And it almost sounds like in your story that there was only so far you could go down that track before you needed to do more or wanted
Yeah,
to do more.
yeah,
And it strikes me that the thing to do there might be building more on ramps.
mhm.
On ramps are actually
That's good.
really an interesting topic because one of the few like on ramps are very different for different movements. So, for example, one of the organizations that has historically done very well, which is a completely different issue, it's got nothing to do with this one, but is the NRA. And that's because every time there's a gun safety class, it's an NRA instructor holding it, and that becomes an on ramp.
Mhm.
And so I almost wonder if there aren't on ramps that w- eh, people who care about this issue are missing around things like men's groups or birthing groups. Like I've heard a lot of people get into the movement through either something that they discover while learning about sexuality as an adult or something they discover when they're about to have kids. So it
Yeah.
strikes me that there's sort of a missed opportunity there of potential for bringing people in.
Many advocates look for areas where there's intersectionality, right? Um, for instance, the parenting groups on Facebook.
Sure.
A lot of advocates will jump in there and try to educate. Unfortunately, some of the advocates end up getting blocked or banned, or because the popular attitude in that parenting group is that they should, circumcise their child.
Right. So I also know you said you're a parent. Are your kids grown up or are they still in the house?
Teenagers, 14, 15.
How is what so as someone who's going to become a parent soon, I'm wondering
Yeah.
how you manage both activism and parenting. What is the process there? And if your family had a reaction to you getting into this activism.
Well, actually, my wife got involved first. It's kind of weird, but that's how it went because I'm a victim. She's not. I mean, she's an indirect victim, right? Because she's related, and she's involved with me sexually. But um, I think that there are two things that were holding me back from getting involved. One was my own grief around the issue as I was learning and recognizing how I'm harmed by the what happened to me, and well, I'm still living with or without, however you want to look at it. And also I was more busy with my work, my previous job, and I things changed a little bit, both with family as far as some health issues in my family, as well as my job. Uh, the job that I was at the time, I got laid off. So that kind of opened the doors for me to spend more time thinking about, focusing on it and all. But all my wife and both my boys are definitely supportive of this and actually involved. And anyone that follows me knows that actually all of them have participated in outdoor protests with me, even with my wearing bloodstained pants.
What was your kids' reaction to you becoming involved in this?
Even Jackson, my oldest, he even said on a comment one time on, I think it was Facebook, whatever, where this person was trying to bash me for having my kids involved in this or whatever, and he's like, I am happy that my dad is speaking out for children. So that warmed my heart. My youngest, he just loves to go protesting with me and hold the signs and even spin the signs like a sign spinner. So and they both hear the reasons people use or excuses for doing this, and they're just horrified that people are justifying this, and to even think about having that done to themselves, they're just disgusted.
It must be an interesting perspective growing up in a family where obviously the fact that they were kept intact is normalized and it's normal to them, to then be exposed to the attitudes of the larger culture, which is so different and so toxic on this issue.
Yeah, I do worry about the psychological impacts to them, being exposed to this fact of the world. But they're growing up, they are teenagers, and age appropriate as much as I can be, and I don't want them to be too sheltered, obviously. I've been lately comparing this to Greta Thunberg. I don't know if you've read her background that her dad wrote about, but before she became an outspoken activist, she got depressed after learning about this, about the problems in the world. And then I guess one day she got a sign out and held it on the side of the road. And that's where her voice, was coming out, and she became alive again. So my boys are, I'm trying to encourage them to express their voice. It starts off early too. It's like, okay, we're in the restaurant to order food. You guys speak up for yourselves. Tell the waiter or whoever what it is you want. Don't wait for me to tell them for you.
They're teenagers though, so I imagine they're at an age where that's a relatively easy thing to do.
It's for my youngest, it was probably just 3 years ago where we were still trying to get him to speak up.
Is he just shy, or is there a particular reason? If you don't mind me asking.
That's a good question. I don't. Well, here's where it started. It started really when he was a toddler. His older brother would always speak for him, and we even to this day we tried to tell his older brother, it's like, no, let him speak for himself.
Sounds like they're looking out for each other.
Yeah.
So speaking of people looking out for each other, what is with the activism you're doing now, what is the hope, the desired outcome of all of that? You mentioned that it's in the future, people will say, thanks for standing up for me, but is there more than that? Is there a particular goal or focus?
Obviously, I think the goal is that people stop cutting children's genitalia ritually, without a medical need. What I'm worried about is the process getting there. As you know, and you identified this in your documentary, some men end up committing suicide over when they realize the losses, and many others have committed suicide. In fact, I've interviewed 2 people that were either their buddy committed suicide or their husband committed suicide, and it seems, at least, that it's very much tied to them learning about the harms of this. So it creates a conundrum for us advocates. We want it to stop, but we don't know how to make it stop without educating people about the harms.
Well, it sounds like what you're describing is the cultural stress of the issue, meaning that there's obviously the initial pain the baby experiences, but there's also the pain that comes from learning about it and then having those thoughts about it as an adult. And then there's another whole trauma just around the reaction of the wider culture. Because even if you were to completely heal your own relationship to this issue, having other people invalidate that experience can be a stressor or a pain in and of itself. And it sounds like too that's what your children experience when someone tries to tell them that there's something, quote unquote wrong with their intact body, or that this
Yeah.
is not something they're allowed to talk about, especially when it also sounds like they're trying to find their voice and you as a parent are trying to encourage them to find their voice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that cultural thing that you're talking about actually leads a lot of advocates into burnout. You probably don't see my wife involved as much in this advocacy work because burnout. She avoids a lot of videos and stuff that I watch because she just can't handle it anymore.
How does burnout manifest for the two of you? What does that mean or look like?
I'm burnt out myself sometimes with just dealing with people that are stuck in their cognitive dissonance and what I call willfully ignorant. Uh, I I used to spend more time going back and forth trying to debate them on it, but anymore I just say, you know what? Go watch the American Circumcision documentary. Go look at this website or whatever. And don't go back and forth with me on this. I don't have the time to sit here and talk to you about it. And it's it is stressful. It's infuriating to deal with people that don't want to do their own homework.
It sounds like the burnout you're describing comes from trying to educate someone who does not want to learn
Mhm.
and attempting to communicate with someone who doesn't want to listen.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I keep relating to this. Cognitive dissonance is something that people deal with. That's for those that aren't aware of what that is. It means that you learn something new, but it conflicts with something that you've been taught all your life or for a very long period of your life, and you have to deal with that inside of your own head. And for certain issues, there's just one layer of cognitive dissonance that someone has to process through. For this, there's several layers of cognitive dissonance that you have to deal with. You have to deal with the fact that if you're cut yourself, you have to deal with that layer. If you cut your children, you have to deal with that layer. If you're a medical professional that's been taught that it's a good thing, you have to deal with that layer. And then you have the religious aspects of it. So if you fit all four of those people are harder to get through the process than others.
And when you are doing your activism on this issue, are you mainly focused on talking to people who are unaware of this issue or prone to disagreement, or spaces where people are prone to disagreement, or are you focused on something else?
Well, one of the things I do to address the burnout is I keep finding other ways to do things, or the other things to do that still contributes to the movement. Just over the past couple of weeks, in fact, well, I came up with this idea, and you might appreciate this being a filmmaker. But I'm not ready. I don't. It might be great if this gets on Netflix or something like that, but I don't really see it going there right now. I'm putting together a docu-series on circumcision harms, right? Because one of the things that I think needs to be seen it's same thing with like FGM. People have heard on mainstream media how horrible FGM is because of all these effects, right? All these harms that happen. Well, there are several harms that happen to males too. It's just not as well known because most of us males were cut when we were babies. So we, just like I didn't know up till age 35, we don't know what we're missing and how things might not be going very well down there because of it. So I put together an outline of all the different ways that people in the world are harmed by these genital cutting rituals. And I started doing interviews with people to go over those and hear their voice and hear their perspective on each one of those.
And what format are you doing these in? Is this over Zoom? Is it
Yep.
in person and camera?
Yep, Zoom just like this. Yeah.
Cool. And what's your plan for them? Are you distributing them somewhere? Do you have them online in some form now that people could go watch?
They're on YouTube. I have a YouTube channel, and I have a couple playlists. I've got multiple playlists, but two main playlists. One is just circumcision harm, which involves me using this thing that's made out of yarn that kind of looks like a dildo with an intact, that's intact. It's got its prepuce and everything like that. And there's a bunch of short videos. They're like 2, 3, 4 minutes long, and I explain one harm at a time in each video. So it's kind of short, not as short as TikTok, one of the videos, but they're still short, so it's a quick watch. And then I have another playlist, and that's just for the raw interviews, and I'm sticking all the raw interviews up there. And when I feel like I've collected enough information, I'll start stitching those together in a video editor.
So it strikes me that what you're collecting is what's usually referred to as lived experience, meaning people's stories,
Mhm.
their personal description of how it's impacted them. Over the course of these, what are the most common ways you've seen that men are impacted by this issue?
Physically, multiple men have talked about their scrotum being drawn up and having a hairy shaft. I think that's probably one of the number one ones. But right next to lack of sensation, or things getting more and more numb as they get older, and they believe that that's due to the lack of coverage on their glands.
And what about emotionally? What is it? Do they talk about that particular impact or aspect of it?
Yeah. The first part is emotional, just by learning about how things were supposed to be, what nature gave them, and all that. Like learning the soil study, and how those certain parts that were there were sensitive to light touch and all that. But I think what's more traumatic is trying to talk to others about it and not getting emotional, empathetic support.
So isolation, invalidation of feelings, loneliness.
Yeah, yeah. And I didn't plan this when I started doing the interviews, but I'm seeing that these interviews are providing a form of mental health help. Because I more than empathize with these guys, I sympathize with them. And I'm also not just sympathizing with fellow men that were cut as children, but I'm also sympathizing with parents, because I am a parent, and I came this close, really close to letting our first son get hurt, get cut. And so just the thought of that just makes me sick, really, really deep inside. And so I think that I can relate with regret parents.
Yeah. So you've had parents on the channel too, or is it just that you've heard their stories through this?
Yeah, I started out doing interviews. I was focusing on victims that were directly cut and intact men, but then I realized, there's a bigger audience here that has a lot to say. And I did a post on Facebook saying, hey, I'm interested in interviewing anyone that's a burnt out intactivist. And oh my gosh, I got so much response. I was really, I didn't expect to see that many.
There are a lot of people who are feeling burnt out.
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me. And it makes me think that what I'm noticing in this too is that there's a lot of attempts to get people who are unaware of this issue to become aware of it. And there might need to be more support for the men who are aware of it in some form or another. I'm thinking a lot too about one of the things I've been reading about is how basically the gay
Brendon.
community historically set up a lot of services to help people in their community. Because when there was for example, a domestic dispute, they couldn't call the police because at the time, um, their lifestyle was considered illegal. And so they had to basically set up their own, social services to intervene in those things. And it
Yeah.
strikes me that for men, there are a lot of things that, although not illegal, there's just no social understanding around no one quite understands how to support them, and that we might need to set up our own support network, so to speak.
Yeah. There is norm.org, for restoring men, and you don't have to choose to restore to be involved with that group. I'm personally not really actively trying to do something about restoring myself. I just don't feel like I have the necessary tissue to work with, and I don't have the emotional strength. Yes.
There is an emotional component to restoration, and it's not
Yeah.
something I've seen a lot of people talk about. That just, if you're doing this, you're having to interact with the wound in a very particular way on a daily basis every time you want to make progress.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of men have talked about this particularly in private in these groups where anonymity is similar to like going to an AA meeting or whatever.
I've been to a norm meeting, and that is similar to the vibe that I got. There's a lot of, excuse me. When I went, I was very surprised. It was a lot of, I guess you'd say, like middle class professionals, like people in their 40s who wear khaki pants, and um, just a very, how do I? And then there's also a couple young guys who were very clearly like gamers, or like it's just sort of the people who you wouldn't necessarily think of as being politically active in any particular way, very normal. But yeah, I did notice a similar energy there.
Yeah, and in LA they've been having online meetings since the pandemic started. That's been really
Sure.
good too.
So across these stories, what are the biggest needs that these men have that we could support them in some way? Is it just hearing the story, or is there more that we could do?
I'm not sure. I'm not a psychologist, but
Well, if they are, so have they articulated anything? Have they said like, this is something I really need, and I'm not getting?
a lot of us, I think, just we need to be heard, and sympathize with it. It's like we need a human mirror.
Yeah. I do healing work with some people and change work, and my wife does that basically for her whole job.
Yeah,
And one of the things that I've learned in that process is that it's very important to initially acknowledge the feelings a person has and just allow them to be seen. And you basically can't do any healing work without that first step. If someone comes in and says, I'm feeling really sad about this, if you just go like, no, you're not, like that's the end. There's no further place to go.
hmm
And that seems to be the way that the wider culture treats this issue, and that also even a lot of people who put themselves in positions of healing treat the issue. I mean, that's obviously how the medical community treats it, but it's also what I've seen a lot of therapists and psychologists do, who are just plugged into the medical way of thinking.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've seen too many stories where men have gone to their counselors, whatever, and either were afraid to bring it up, or when they did bring it up, the 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 counselor, the therapist has their own issues around this to deal with, and they just can't handle. They can't stay professional or whatever about it.
I've learned, though, as someone who does healing work, and I've learned from every other healer I know, that very often people who do healing work will attract clients that have issues similar to them.
Mm.
It's almost like how, if you know someone who was in a dysfunctional relationship growing up, they'll just keep recreating that dysfunctional relationship, and it like doesn't matter who they meet. That's who they seem to attract. Healers often do the same thing. They keep getting clients that have the thing that they need to heal. And I've had this happen to me. Every healer I know has had it happen. So I don't know. I kind of feel like if that happens to a healer, then it's a sign that they need to work on that thing. And the good healers I know will literally tell a client, hey, I actually have my own issues around that. I'm not the right healer for you yet. Come back to me in a month when I've solved this problem for myself.
Yeah, I would actually love to get in front of healers like that have their own issues about it, and have two-way conversation instead of it just being, well, you're here to heal me. Maybe I can help you heal yourself too.
It's also an example of, there's a frame in therapy and psychology that very often ignores larger social problems, where they see the person's feelings as the thing to solve, not the situation. Whereas we would all understand, if someone was in a dysfunctional relationship where someone didn't acknowledge their feelings, that we'd have to talk about that first and maybe get them out of the relationship. And if that relationship is with society, then we might have to make some other changes in the world. But,
Yeah, true.
So the other thing I was wanting to, actually, you know what? Now's a good time to jump into this. So I have 5 questions I'm asking everyone who is coming to talk about the issue of circumcision and genital cutting. But the first is, why is this issue important? Or what is the most important thing about this issue?
It hurts. It harms.
Nothing else to add to that.
I think that's a huge, just those words right there. Just, you could go on and on with just that alone.
So the second question I have is, what is the biggest challenge facing people on this issue?
Cognitive dissonance.
Can you tell me a little more about that?
Like I was saying earlier, you've got multiple layers of cognitive dissonance. So people have to consider the possibility that they're actually harmed physically by the fact that they were cut. They have to accept the possibility that they made a bad choice when, as a parent. They have to accept that the medical side of things may be incomplete, and that shouldn't be a big surprise to people, because medicine has had lots of flaws in history. So, and then the religious side, that might be a big hurdle to deal with. I don't really have an answer for that one, but I'm a big fan of religious freedom. So I just keep saying, leave it up to the individuals to decide for themselves.
And the third question I have is, how is it that we need to grow and change to meet this challenge? You can think about it for a moment if you need to.
Well, simply put, we need a growth mindset. You can look that up there. It means quite a few things, but it kind of also, a lot of people think of having an open mind, right? Being willing to take in information even if it doesn't sound right, at least at first, right? And stay curious.
So a growth mindset in this context means willingness to grow in your awareness and understanding.
Exactly.
And what's the biggest opportunity or potential opportunity that we have around this issue?
To support each other with love.
So there's an opportunity here, because of the pain, to potentially further our connection to one another.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges I see with advocates all the time is putting themselves into the other person's shoes, and like reading the situation, understanding, knowing your audience, right? You have to meet them where they are at this moment in time. Um, Reacting to someone with ad hominem or whatever might just cut off the conversation and cut off their opportunity to give the person more and more information that might get them through their own cognitive dissonance.
I love that idea that the pain that people experience around this issue is actually a potential source of connection and growth. That totally reframes everything that people normally think about this issue and turns all of the negatives about it into a positive, and one that I definitely share and see.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think you can make lots of parallels with that. For instance, if you go off to war with other comrades, that time spent together fighting and struggling and whatever else, you're doing it side by side with them, even though you might not have met them or whatever beforehand. and you come out at the end feeling very close to those individuals.
I definitely felt that with everyone I spoke to over the course of the documentary that I made, and everyone I've connected with since then, that there is a connection that's possible because this issue is so large and it affects people so deeply, that we're actually able to go very deep very quickly in terms of our connection. So the last question I had here was, what action should people take on this issue? What should they do?
Whatever you can think of. Whatever you are driven to do, whether that's put money toward it, reach out to fellow advocates, ask them what they're doing, ideas. Sign up at Genital Autonomy Society.
I was about to ask, the thing I have written for this question is, what should people do? And then also, if you want to give a shameless plug for you or your organization. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm 100% for the shameless plug. Please. We'll also buy my books and my movie. Thank you. Okay. Moving on.
Absolutely. American Circumcision. It's, Brendon, I don't know if I've told you this before, but I was elated to see that documentary, because before I came up to that, I had seen such long threads for the debate, and you just see the debate, the same thing over and over and over again, same reason, same excuses on both sides, and it just gets tiring to see it over and over and over again. And it just like when I even think about trying to educate people about it, it's like that just seems like a huge mountain to deal with. Sit there and spend hours trying to educate one person. Now I could say, hey, the debate is fully covered in this one documentary, and you hear from both sides of the debate, very strong sides of the debate. And what you've done is extremely impressive. The fact that you got in front of guys like Edgar Schoen and Andrew Friedman and biggest of all, Brian Morris.
Well, thank you. I feel like, you were talking about the pain being an opportunity for connection, but I actually also feel like the conflict is an opportunity for connection. That I felt like I learned something talking to them, and that weird as it may sound to some people, I enjoyed the connection that came from it. And I feel like too that there is an opportunity for connection even around the conflict on this issue, if people are willing to allow it to be that way. In other words, there's a lot of times where you try to connect to someone around this issue and they shut it down. Like because there might be conflict, because there might be pain, the connection doesn't feel safe. So like, oh, we can't have that conversation.
Yeah.
Whereas if you actually had the conversation, you'd learn so much. And there's so many things you'd learn about that person, about their values. You would learn about what's important to them about raising children, what they want for the future of the next generation, how they feel about their own sexuality. Like there's all these things you can learn.
Yeah.
And what I notice and for example, you mentioned parenting groups that sometimes are like, they have a no bashing rule, or they want to avoid conflict on the issue. It's like, no, they don't want that, because most people don't know how to have conflict in a constructive way where it actually deepens the connection. But conflict's always the opposite. It's, if you've ever like gotten a really big fight with a friend of yours, as long as you could resolve the conflict, you're actually stronger friends at the end.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've just got married recently, but I'm sure you've had some fights with her, right?
Of course. Right? Yeah. We have healthy conflict in our relationship, like any. Sometimes it's unhealthy, and that's when we have to go look at how we were raised and what relationship patterns we were brought into as children. But it's good.
Yeah, it is. It often you end up coming out stronger and better for it.
It is, and that is it's funny. That was actually something I told Christina really early in the relationship. She was like, well, what do you want? And I was like, I want you to have the fight with me. I want you to actually give me what you're really feeling, so that I can take that as a part of myself and I can help you meet that need, because I don't want to just bulldoze the need. I want to meet it, even if I have a different perspective or I'm in conflict.
Absolutely. Totally there with you.
So sometimes I'll, as the husband, I'll just tell her this is what we need to do because I know. But that's only in those rare situations where our safety depends on it.
Yeah,
Of
we have
course,
to do the same.
sometimes in those situations, I'm just in a trigger and our safety doesn't depend on it, and I'm being
Yeah.
hyper vigilant. I have to solve my own triggers, but it happens.
Yeah, as a parent, I have to do the same thing with my children. As much as I want to get them to choose with me, choose the same thing, choose the right thing, sometimes you just don't have time for that, and it's like you just have to kind of take control and say, okay, we're doing this. This is how we have to do it right now, and maybe we'll talk about it more later and talk it through.
I've heard from other parents that gets easier when you allow your children choice in the small things.
Mhm.
So if you give them 999 choices a day, then on the 1,000th you can be like, look, I need to make this one. And
Yeah,
they'll be much more okay with it, knowing that you give them choice on most of the all the other areas of
absolutely.
their life.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. So speaking of which, do you have any parenting advice for someone who will and it'll probably be, when this comes out, it'll be 5 months I will be a parent.
It's probably cliche, but spend as much time as you possibly can, because it goes by way too fast.
It already
Eh,
feels like it's going by fast.
I'm sure.
She
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
just told me she was pregnant a month ago. So
Enjoy those kicks on the belly, yeah, enjoy every bit. One of the challenges is when you have your second and third child is, you might get a little bit burnt out on taking pictures. You might, the first one you'll take lots of pictures of, and the second one you will take fewer pictures of. So
middle
it's really a
children
challenge.
get a raw deal sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm familiar with the dynamics of oldest, middle, and youngest.
Yep. That's all I can think of right now with parenting. I knowing you, Brendon, as much as I've come to know you over the past few years, I think that you're going to be an awesome dad.
Well, thank you. I hope so. Is there anything else that you want to tell people about this issue? Anything that I didn't ask you that you really want to talk about or wanted to talk about?
No, I think we really covered things pretty well across the board.
Cool. You know what it strikes me? The thing I'm taking away from this conversation is that, so when I made my film, there's a need to share information on a really broad scale, and I think that need is still there, and there's absolutely still room for more things like that, both movies and books and YouTube and all those different things. But it also sounds like that there is a need for, when people become aware of this issue, for ways for them to take care of each other. And this is something that every other movement has done at some point. So um in different civil rights movements, in the gay community, in the transgender community,
Mhm.
in people who are among people who are interested in racial justice of every background, there actually, there's a point where people within those communities say, we have needs that the wider culture doesn't meet and doesn't know how to meet, and we actually need to figure out how to meet them amongst each other so we can teach the larger world what it is we want. And
Yeah.
now, there's all sorts of things that people do that were first discovered in those communities, that it's now considered normal to do because people understand, well, that's what it means to be nice to someone, is that's what they need, and this is how their needs, how we can meet those needs, or what feels good to them. um, and it strikes me that we might need to start developing some of those things internally
Mhm.
so that we can show people externally.
Yeah. Yep. I'm there with you.
Well, where can people find you if after this? Obviously, genitalautonomysociety.org. Did I get that right?
Yep. That's correct.
And where else should people go?
Well, my name, I use my real name with this. I'm not hiding behind anonymity. I'm on Twitter as ADKISOJK, which is the first characters of my last name, and then J is my first name, and K is my middle initial, both on Twitter and on TikTok. You can find my name on YouTube and on Facebook, and my picture is very easy to identify. If you're watching this in video format, you should be able to recognize my face quite easily. Yeah, somewhere in there you should be able to find me.
Cool.
Reach out to me.
I feel like the anonymity thing, I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased from coming from a world of artists, but I feel like this issue is far less controversial than people make it out to be.
Well, Marilyn Milos got fired, right? But
Sure.
That was 4 decades ago, right?
She was working in the hospital system, though, and she was
Yeah.
the first, like one of the first people ever to talk about it. And
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like that was a different world.
Yeah. Actually, though, I was just talking to someone a couple years ago. He got in trouble for calling a hospital and complaining about what was done to him multiple times, and they made claims, and he ended up in court over it and all that.
What they said? What was the claim that they made? Like, what was it
that
he
was making certain threats.
I see.
Threats.
So they've felt like his behavior was threatening.
Yes. Yeah. So I understand the anger for sure, but at the same time, we have to kind of follow the rules.
Was he actually making threats though, or was he just upset?
He claims that he was just upset, and he didn't make certain claims that they claimed that was made.
It's also, we were talking about conflict earlier. There's a book that I read by Sarah Schulman called Conflict is Not Abuse. And in it, she talks about how, as the title says, conflict is not abuse. Meaning that if you have conflict with someone, that's different than abuse. And abuse actually requires a power differential or physical harm of some kind. And that very often when two people are in conflict, one of them will frame it as abuse, as a power play, because then they can get an authority involved. Yeah. So if they frame what he's doing as abuse, then like they can invite the state in, and they can bring charges and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas it sounds to me, assuming his testimony is correct and he's not actually making threats. Mm-hmm. But if he's not and he's just angry, it sounds like conflict. Yeah.
The challenge is identifying where the line is between freedom of speech and harassment or something else. Bloodstained men or other advocates or activists could be out standing in front of a hospital or whatever. At what point does it become harassment of the hospital or the people?
You can protest a hospital. People protest police stations.
Yeah. Yeah. I personally have called some hospitals and clinics, and I call them, and I try to be very official and forward and not and say, well, I'd like to file a formal complaint. And then they often transfer me to someone that is a complaint department or whatever.
Right.
And a complaint department is supposed to be there. Customer service department, whatever. They're supposed to listen to you. In IT, I'm a customer service guy myself, so they just sit there and pretty much hear you out. Right. So
has anything ever come of that? Have you ever had?
Well, I actually called one urologist's office one time, and surprisingly, the urologist actually called me back one evening after his work and all that, and he had a heck of a long conversation with me. It was like an hour, and he came up with the usual excuses that so many of us advocates have heard time and time again, and I was able to just take care of each one. And near the end of it, he's like, actually, you make some very good points. So it was good. Something came out of trying, and I often compare it to a salesman's job. You might make 10 calls or whatever and only get one lead. It is what it is.
I think that's a really good story, though, because it shows that the communication is possible if both parties are willing to do it. So in that case, he was actually willing to talk with you, and not just customer service talk to you, but like actually have a conversation as a human being.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that many of the doctors I've heard who frame protest as harassment are not willing to have a conversation. And if someone approached them cordially or gently, that actually wouldn't get through at all. And the reason that they're attracting really angry protest is because people who feel like there is no other way that they can communicate get angry.
Yeah.
Like this is what people have do since they're little kids. If you ignore a baby long enough and don't take its needs seriously, it'll cry and get mad and get upset with you, and rightfully so. I don't know that I have anything else to add. Is there anything you want to add?
No, this has been great. I really appreciate this. I'm quite honored that you reached out to me for this.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brendon Marotta Show. If you liked this episode, please share it with someone else who would also like it, and then go on whatever platform you listen to the show on and leave a positive review. If you want to support the show directly, go to brendonmarotta.com/show and subscribe there. Paid subscribers get special unreleased bonus material and live events that are only available to them. Once again, that is brendonmarotta.com/show. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you all later.